Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the LinkedIn Live, the monthly LinkedIn Live that will lead on various relevant topics that I find urgent and important in my practice as an executive and leadership coach that I kind of face with my clients or that come my way. My name is Tatiana Sanikovic, and I'm an executive leadership coach. And my mission is positively transforming organizations by working with the leaders to become more conscious and joy-filled and still achieve success and the goals they need. And that I do by working one-on-one with leaders and in group work. I also have content in a newsletter that comes in monthly. One is coming out next week. We do this LinkedIn Live every month. And I also definitely I write an article once a week on a relevant topic for that month. And so I have also some content online in other social platforms. I am delighted to have a guest today on this LinkedIn Live. The topic, this time, our topic is energy. And if you could see, the title is E equals MC square. We all studied it in school. But I thought it would be really cheeky, actually, in terms of energy equals motivated colleagues squared. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I find it in my work with clients, it's one of the most fundamental topics that comes up through no matter what question or challenge they bring to working with a coach. So today, I have Lori Putnam joining us, and Lori is actually, Lori and I go way back. We're former colleagues, also friends, but she's a client of mine, actually the longest client of mine. We were just laughing about this right before we started, is that it's been almost 2 years, which is a lot of changes actually happened in Lori's life. So I can attest to that. And I wanted really Lori to join us because energy was the big topic when we started working. And it's something that she, from my opinion, transformed through our work together and on her own, doing her own work quite a bit in relationship with it. And so her roles changed as well. So I'll do the introduction. And so at the moment, and I'm going to have my notes just so I don't lose anything. Lori has spent more than 25 years telling stories that connect and inspire us. As a strategic communications executive, she helps universities and nonprofits define the essence of their mission and communicate the key priorities that support their values. She has served as an executive speechwriter, marketing director, and employee communications advocate. And most recently, she was named Interim Chief of Staff for the Deputy Vice Chancellors for Academic and Student Affairs for the California State University system. She is also working on a book on the demise of hustle culture and command and control leadership. I am absolutely excited and very honored, Lori, to join me today. Take your time on that and also be able to share the parts about the topic. As we start on this topic, technical pieces for all of you, please feel free to comment, put any questions as we discuss this topic. We will spend about 20-25 minutes on this topic. I can see your comments and questions, so I'll bring them up as we start the conversation. But overall, I think, is there anything else you want to add to your introduction?
Well, I want to say thank you, Tatiana, for this invite. It's a little outside of my comfort zone, but you've always been such a good supporter and encourager about that. And I think it's relevant to our conversation today, which is how do we really support our colleagues and team members to focus on their strengths and to really realize their potential, and energy plays a big role in that. So I'm delighted to join you for this little discussion today.
I really appreciate the stretch of the comfort zone that you go. That is definitely energy piece. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. I definitely noticed that. So I want to start with the first question for us, and we'll go kind of back and forth, is what do we mean by energy? So in our conversation, for example, what do you mean by energy when you speak about that?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question. And I think especially, In the business world, there might be a hesitancy to use some of these terms. I think we're comfortable with things like emotional intelligence and motivation, but I think there's another layer to that, and it is energy. I would say, in a very simple way, it's the fuel in the car, it's the battery in the phone that helps us achieve our goals. And I think, especially as our workplace has changed, pre-pandemic and then through the pandemic, we're really questioning, how do we motivate our employees, and how do we address the Great Resignation? And I think energy is a key part of that.
Absolutely. We also, I know in our work, we've talked about even somatic part of it. And somatic part, to me, it's that connection to your body. So when people go, how's your energy? Or you kind of question, the person might question, like, what are they talking about? How does that connect to even in leadership? It's that, how are you emotionally and physically doing? And how are those connected? Are you paying attention to this sensation of your body? Because all of those are definitely connected, whether you notice them or not. And so from the somatic perspective, it can tell you a lot of things if you pay attention to how your body operates and how your emotions and reactions run through your body and what that evokes.
And it's such a good point when you're saying, whether you as the person recognizes it or not, your colleagues certainly are picking it up. Totally. So if you think that, you're coming in, you may be fatigued, you may be, excuse me, under some kind of deadline. Hold on.
Yeah.
And you come into a meeting that way, that energy, when we talk about reading the room and the person has a vibe, it can change a meeting in a 180 if you're not really conscious of the energy that your presence, sometimes we call it the executive presence. So I think the work that you have done with me and with other clients, especially at the executive level, it really is a key part to be more aware of how your emotions are impacting that energy, and then what impact that has on your team.
Absolutely. And I think that actually segues really well into second question I had for us, is that, it used to be that we measured the productivity with time, or by the time span of how long it took to do something or get something done. And why is that? Why do you think that's no longer effective? And how does energy play a role? I mean, and you've touched a little bit on this already right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting to see. I started in my career in the mid 90s and with a startup. And I remember the CEO at the time would actually go into the parking lot and monitor who was in and how early did they come in. So FaceTime was it was a really big part of, are you really into the mission? Are you dedicated? And then I think we saw that evolve, especially kind of in the Silicon Valley culture and what I now call kind of the hustle culture, right? It's like, work 24/7, be always on call. But the irony of that is that when companies are looking for creativity and innovation, when you push your staff that way, it actually suppresses the ability to be creative and innovative, because your energy is depleted. So just like you can't use your phone if it's at zero battery, that's happening to our teams. We're seeing it with resignations. So there's a little bit of a disconnect now when we think about the return to the office. We want to see people in their seats, because for some folks that seems like, well, that's productive, when in fact there may just be a whole different way to get to the creativity and the innovation that we're looking for, that has nothing to do with how much time we're spending together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that part of, and that's a totally different even topic, the hybrid work environment. So the remote, it's like, on one hand, it's a new world. On the other hand, it's like, well, it's the reality. And so it's good to have touch points on it. And that flexibility, that gives different outlet to the energy, but also like that part of the energy, the focus, the focus of the people, in the sense of what, if we measured before in terms of time, to now the measurement is more in terms of the quality and the impact. I mean, in your own work, it's like some things might take much longer time or shorter time, but the impact, particularly for your system, it's a state university system, is tremendous. And so figuring out how that person's work, what's their input into the bigger system in the organization, not just by the 8 hours they put in or however long that project took, is what you were touching base on. How creative and innovative is the environment? How are they able to work with that? The focus, and the clarity is also is a very different productivity tool. But I think you and we speak about it quite a bit in our work, is the Maslow's, the peak experiences, right? That are spoken about. It's that flow state.
Yep.
The flow state is the point of it is you lose track of time. The flow is you're so lost in the task that you're so motivated, or in the strategy, conversation, or in the process of after the strategy conversation, how do you put it all in place? That's their time is not a measure of that. The measure is how much in the flow everybody was. Were you in the flow? Did you create that space for your team? What was that exchange? And I can bet money on it that the people walk away from those kind of experiences in a much different state than, okay, I did my 8 hours, I'm closing my computer and I think I did some work today, or like, it's a very different level.
Yeah. And that is a healthy cycle, right?
Yeah.
When you feel connected to a strategy, a higher mission. Simon Sinek calls it a just cause. This idea that there's something greater and bigger than your individual perspective. In those times, I mean, we still encounter challenges. We still have deadlines. I'm not suggesting that we don't manage, the practical timeline. But when you tap into your team's motivation and what inspires them, you'll see a different presence. And it doesn't mean that they have to be around the clock working on projects. In fact, it's better when they're not, because they come back refreshed. And I think, athletes understand this, or people who maybe train for marathons understand this. You have, this, you have a workout day, but you should also have a rest day. I can only speak for myself. I would get into this mode where I'm just pushing, because you're pushing towards a deadline. And unfortunately, you become less productive. You become more reactive. The options that you would normally see for strategies, you start to have tunnel vision. And so it's just this unfortunate cycle that you get into. So this is something that I want to make sure that I can share at least my lived experience with others, so that we can encourage more and more of our colleagues to think of a different way of how we manage teams.
Yeah, and I mean, and we can speak about it a little more, but you and I also worked with the tool that I facilitate, the motivation factor piece, right? That shows you your specific, yours or your team's, but in this case, when we worked one-on-one, is your own specific motivation. And so when you come back to that, just like you said, like you get a completely different unlocked energy or on a project when you know why you're doing it, and you kind of align in all the things that motivate you specifically, based on your talents and the needs and the energy piece that we work together. But as you spoke to motivation, I thought sometimes the word is used quite a bit, but sometimes it's such an ambiguous word for people. It's it's like a blanket, and they go, yeah. And I go, what does it mean to you? And they're like, I don't know.
Right. And I think what you've helped me understand, there's the external motivation, and there's traditional types of motivation, compensation, perks, foosball in the meeting room, things like that. But there's the intrinsic motivation. And I think, at least for me, that is what actually propels me more so than the external. And especially when you get into situations where it's very complicated projects, multiple deadlines, multiple teams, when you can still go back to what is your core values, you can reset, which is always very helpful.
Yeah. Why do you do what you do? And that's exactly, it's just like, some people go, oh, I'm an extrovert and introvert. It's like this black and white, or one way or the other. Everybody has both, intrinsic and external motivations. Only some of us are more motivated, just like what you were saying, by external factors. But a lot of people are really motivated by internal factors. And understanding that about yourself and your team, I think it's super important, because that's how you as a leader can figure out how to motivate your team. Because if they're totally different from you, your techniques that work for you are not going to work for them, because they're definitely, in that basic level. And just we had a little comment from Natalia saying, I hated those check on the parking lot. That was very disrespectful. It's just really deflating. I mean, really. And then it becomes a competition. it becomes a very different culture. I mean, it really creates a certain culture.
Exactly. And there's a quote from Steve Jobs that says basically, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. You're hiring smart people so that they can tell you what to do. But I think it's human nature that we feel like in some ways that we know best. And sometimes that we know best is I'm going to check every day and make sure that you did these tasks. But what we're missing is the ability for our colleagues to step into their roles as leaders. I think there's another common saying about the fact that for leaders, it's not about getting results. It's about taking care of your people who are responsible for getting results. But I think sometimes, and I've been guilty of this in the past, we can focus too much on those projects and the tasks and forget about the people.
Absolutely. And you and I spoke about it. Being an independent contributor, you can run all kinds of projects and you can, kind of skyrocket and like to move mountains. The minute you become a leader of people, it all becomes about people. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's projects, you're still moving, you still got to move and succeed. And you know it quite well, but it's like once there's a human factor, that is actually the most important one, because we've heard this phrase before: people don't leave organizations, they leave people, right? That manage them.
You leave your managers. Yeah.
I've definitely experienced that, in my own life experience. And then when you were talking right now about Steve Jobs quote, I literally just did this on social media this week, where I broke out my own story, one of them, of a very big micromanager boss I had. And it's that part of like, if you hired me for the role and you gave me a task or you gave me a project, leave me alone. Step out of my swim lane and stay in your swim lane. But that wasn't his case. And it was just absolutely draining. I mean, it was just killing my energy, because it's exactly, he'd give me a project, and then every day, just like literally word for word you said, I was like, oh wow, he would check on it. And it's like, what's the point?
And unfortunately, I think it's very common. Both of us have experienced that, and I don't think we're alone. And I think it speaks to something else, which is somewhat related to energy, which is this idea of trust in the workplace, right? This idea of psychological trust. It's such a major part of like the foundation of a high performing team. So if you want that level of energy, and energy, actually can flow different ways, right? It can be high energy, but it can also be calming, grounding energy. The most mature, effective leaders I've encountered are very, I don't want to use the word comforting, but when you start to feel a little anxiety, when you're with them and in their presence, you can start to feel calm. And then in that stillness, you can start to think a little more strategically, but you have to have that trust. And so I think that micromanagement type of default is when the trust does not exist. It could be both parties or one party. And it's just unfortunate that still is something that's very prevalent in our workplace today.
Yeah. And it's something I wanted to touch a little more finesse when you said, company, but like calm, their presence, which is very grounded. Mm-hmm. So you as a leader, that's what your role is as well, or just in your life. The chaotic, the very hectic way, or very quick interactions or reactions, they don't create that grounding effect for yourself or for others. So that's something, and we'll speak to a little bit more to like, what are the things that could be done, but just finding ways that you can ground yourself. How do you achieve that sense of calm? Because just like what you're saying, it's not just for you, it's actually for other people as well. And so just being very mindful of that. And
And we know that emotions are contagious. They are. So if you're feeling stress and you come and you walk into a meeting with your colleagues and you let that stress run wild, I've been in many meetings that have been derailed from that. So there's things that we need to be mindful of. If you need to take a 5-minute break and just take a walk outside, you've always encouraged me to do that. Take a deep breath, but don't bring it into the next meeting, because it just ends up flowing through everything. And then the positive side of that is when you have someone who has really positive and is clear on their expectations, when they come into a meeting, you want to have a meeting with them all the time, right? These are the people
they have the common effect, but they also have a very kind of directional, sturdy feeling to them. And people do seek that because it's a common effect. So that totally makes sense. And that kind of leads me to talk about more of what happens in your experience and what you think is when we don't manage our energy levels well in ourselves, in our teams.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way you and I started to work together is we were with an organization that was high stress, ironically, based on what industry it was in. And so I actually ended up getting, pretty much classical burnout. And this was in 2019. So this was before burnout really was more accepted, I think, because of the pandemic. But I do remember in 2019, the World Health Organization had actually labeled it, burnout as a occupational hazard or something to that effect. And that was like a wake-up call to me, because at that moment, I was working 24/7, and I had my CEO basically said it was up to me to control that burnout, that it was not a responsibility of the organization. And I do see it from one way. As an individual, you do need to have advocacy and be able to own your own part of it. But there wasn't an understanding or even an acknowledgement that a culture can create burnout, and that what happens from there. So all this to say is, when you and I started to get together, if I was a cell phone, my battery was probably at 5%, right? And at that point, you have very little options. You definitely aren't tapping into imagination or positive, what is possible. And I remember you had me, from the very basic level reset, you had me like lay down on my sofa and just be still for 10 minutes. And I don't know if you remember what happened. I fell asleep. Like, it was almost like a laptop going to sleep. Because my nervous system and everything had been just running, adrenaline for 2 years. So I speak to that saying, so when you're in burnout, you don't realize, at least I didn't see that I was in burnout. I thought I just needed to move to the next project. And it takes a while to recover. It's not just one weekend, at a wellness retreat. You actually have to make some serious adjustments, both in how you approach your work life. I don't say balance, because I don't believe it is balance. I think you just have to integrate and figure out, every day where you're going to spend your focus on. And it took about a year to get through that, I think.
No, it definitely takes time. And I wanted to touch base on it. It's like you recognize it now, but when we started working, like, that wasn't the case until we named it. And I was like, this is what this is. Yeah. And it was like total light bulb, I remember, for you. But yes, I say this actually when I work with my clients, which I noticed actually majority of them have they're at a certain state of burnout. They don't come to me, hey, I'm burnt out, because when you're in burnout, just like you spoke to it, it's like super narrow blinders on, and you're so depleted, you have no ability to even ask for support and resources. And so that exercise, I remember asking you to just lay down, and I remember you saying, can I read? I was like, no. Can I watch something? I was like, no. You're like, so I'm supposed to just lay there? And I was like, yeah. And do nothing. And so it was the most, like, just very fun, but a challenging exercise for you. And exactly, when we met next time, I generally don't follow up until you bring something up, but I was so curious, and I said, what happened? You're like, I fell asleep. And you were so like, can you imagine what happened? I was like, really? Wow. And guess what? Nobody died. You slept for over 40 minutes and everything was okay. So yeah, I want to add to the burnout piece of the, what happens when we don't manage. It's like, also we talked about team dynamics, that they become strained. People become a lot more conflict focused because everybody is short. They don't have the patience or the bandwidth to just even, like, not even just to have imagination and creativity. Beyond that, it's more to address things, to respond and not react. And so we can go on. I mean, the list can be quite lengthy in terms of the missed opportunities and the relationships and all of that. And I definitely want, to be mindful of time and really for us to focus on what tools, like another piece is like, what tools can we use? And, you've noticed that you've used over the time to restore energy and, more importantly, prevent the burnout from your part and experience.
I'll give just a few, but I'm going to let you have enough time on this because you have a whole toolbox I want to make sure people can tap into, because it's been amazing for me. I think one is really being clear on your values, which has helped me as my coach, so that when you start to feel overwhelmed, as we all do, you can go back to your values, and it helps you be more discerning. I think one of my challenges, I have always been very service oriented, so that can fall into people pleasing and hard to say no to people. But when you're clear on your values, it gives you a boundary. And that was the other tool that you really helped me work on. And I don't think I'm unusual. Some of us, whether how we were raised as children or whatnot, boundaries were not something that we're familiar with. So we let a lot of people cross our boundaries. So when you know now that you have the permission to say, this is what I'm willing to do, and that's in your control. However that person reacts to that, you can't control it. It is what it is. But to have that freedom to have a boundary, it was life-changing for me. I really was able to really rearrange and prioritize how I approached work.
Yeah, and I think one of in my experience as well is, well, first of all, I definitely want to emphasize the part about knowing your values and coming back and being discerning is definitely the work that you've done. And it really watching, as we work through our sessions, is watching you as a coach to be like, oh, wait, what are my values? Let me just, and like really letting me know how you just shuffle things so much easier. Coming back to that, all I have to do is just remind you, like, did you think of this? And then, so that to me is just like magic. And in terms of, you said about clearing the purpose and then boundaries, it's like a topic on its own. And you're right. Majority of us growing up, myself included, did not have good modeling of what healthy boundaries are and how to communicate them. But they're the gist of everything. It's literally, if you think of a big container, that's our life in whatever way. And if we don't have those walls, they don't need to be rigid. They need to be huge. Everybody's different, but they need to be there for safety, for yourself to understand yourself and how do you communicate to the world. And I remember one of my bosses, one of the things was like, it's just people say, well, I can't set a boundary because my boss comes to me and kind of dumps all these projects all the time. And I remember I had one of those and I was like, I can't do all of this. And he was a person who said, well, no is not an answer. However, there was a caveat here. It's like, but I need you to let me know then what's not going to get done. So I really actually learned in that regard that, no, I'm not going to say directly, no, I'm not doing this, but I'm saying, I can't, if you want me to do this right now, what would you like me not to do? And I knew, just like you said, based on my values and my priorities, I knew the top 3 things, you know what I mean, that were on my plate. So then it's a collaboration and a conversation versus this push and pull. So in any situation, I think all of that is very possible. And then, there's a whole ton of tools for sure. I mean, one of them I always come back to is actually physical activity. That's just something that drives my energy. Like I haven't exercised for a bit. And this morning I was like, I've got to do something. So like it was 10 minutes. It doesn't need to be long, but it is for each person to understand what works for them. There's something that worked for you. It's like, I'm more of a morning person. You were like, no, I'm going to do this in the evening. I was like, be my guest. That is not how my body runs, but it's that point of like, what's another engine or another way to move the energy. And anytime somebody feels, unless you're really actually people burned out and really exhausted, that's another stressor. Otherwise, that is the way to restart your engine in some way. So like literally sometimes during the day, I'm like, just do 10 push-ups or like 10 squats.
And I want to just acknowledge how well you are about meeting people where they're at, because I can tell you when I was in burnout, being told, well, you need to go exercise for 30 minutes and go take a walk. It feels like just more on your to-do list. So I really appreciate that you see that it's just that tiny step. I mean, I think James Clear is the author of Atomic Habits. You just need to do like a 5-minute change, and you'll be amazed, and be consistent with it. You'll be amazed at what can happen within a month, 2 months. You change your perspective is what happens.
Absolutely. And then practicing that, and then you'll see that it all adds up. And then of course we can always talk about mindfulness and meditation that adds to the, it's different approaches. But I wanted to the last question I had for us is more around what other ways can executives particularly leverage their energy presence to better lead their teams? And you did speak about executive presence. So can you expand a little more on that topic for us?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say and we've talked about this a little bit, being more aware of how energy is flowing through you. So I've been doing Duolingo and Latin, and what I found out is emotion is in the Latin word is energy in motion, which, hey, that makes sense. Emotion, energy in motion. So when you're more mindful of the emotions that are running through you and how that impacts your team, I think you become a more effective leader in your culture. I mean, we could have multiple talks about culture. It starts with the leader. You need to model, you need to be aware. I would say though, also, it's this idea of playing to strengths. I think sometimes we get into deficit thinking. And again, Tatiana, I want to acknowledge the work you do with the motivation factor. It's moving away from just focusing on what we're not good at, and really just focusing your attention, pivoting that attention to what you're really good at, and do more of that. And I think if leaders could do that more in the workplace as well, we would have less resignations, we'd have less micromanagers, and we'd have a lot less conflicts happening.
Absolutely. And I think to highlight, you just brought up that point in terms of the motivation factor in the work, is that, and it's it's totally brain-based science. But what I learned while actually learning to teach it and do facilitation is that we humans tend to exactly focus on the things we don't do well, and literally gravitate to that to move them, even if it's like literally a hair, like a little bit. But that actually, people take, for brain science, it takes 70% of our energy to move something that's not working well for us, or not our strength, as you were saying, right? Or not our talent. 70% to move it a little bit. But if we take our talents and the strength that we have and we utilize and focus more on that, that is 70% of the energy moving things just like leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
I think once I read that, and like as I speak to every person I work with on that, I go, forget that one. Just it's all good. You either can find somebody else to do it, or you can do it in a very minimal way, but find the things that bring you exactly that, like those values, and that light you up. That you go, I love like what you doing, or how you spend your time at home and at work. And I think for the leaders, is if you come back to executive presence and stuff, is that, as you mentioned, work-life integration. How do we find things that it's not exactly balanced, or it's completely like boundary clear? It's that what brings us joy, or what makes us alive overall in life. How do you bring that to work?
Yes.
How do you model that? How do you incorporate it? So then people, because as a leader, trust me, people are always watching you. And they're not doing what you say, they're doing what you do. So
parents, you know that about kids too, right?
101, and you and I always laugh about it, having both teenage boys, is that, oh my God, leadership is so like parenting all the time. Only for some reason, it's easier for our 16-year-olds, to hear some things. And when we're at work, and it's like, all right, adults, you're still stuck in certain ways. You're not listening. And so absolutely, it's like, as an executive in your executive presence and the leader, your energy permeates. So it is your responsibility to take care of it, and, find your self-care, find the ways that you can manage it, find the boundaries of what's possible, what not. And of course, then check with your team. And it's like, about this, we can talk forever. So as a goodbye, as a farewell to everybody, what would be a couple of things that you think, like just a takeaway that you think, have been important in your executive career, and just in particular lately in your change in your promotion as well?
Well, I would say this, and especially people who may be just starting their careers, there's three things, and I think it comes from Rosbeth Moss-Cantor. She's a Harvard business professor. The three things that employees really want are mastery, membership, and meaning. So mastery meaning having satisfaction of competency in your skill set. You know, again, talking about playing to your strengths. Membership, feeling to be part of a community, a healthy culture, right? Not a toxic one. And then meaning, and that goes back to my work has some meaning. You know, there's a famous story about John F. Kennedy going to the Houston Space Center before a big flight, and he runs into a janitor and asks the janitor, what is he doing? And the janitor says, I'm putting a man on the moon. And that's when a culture, and Tatiana, you know this, I'm a junkie for NASA, but that is a culture that is high performing, that everyone understands that everybody has a contribution to be made. So I would say for budding leaders, emerging leaders, remember that the human factor, you'll be looking at projects and you're looking at technology and you're looking at budgets, but it's the human factor that's going to be the difference between whether you meet your mission or you don't. And then I would just say, in general, takeaway, and maybe this is related to energy, but don't lose your sense of humor. I have found my sense of humor has been my saving grace through everything of all my different journeys of life. And why for me humor is because it gives you, it helps to expand your perspective. And so don't take things too seriously, right?
I was going to say, it totally relates to energy because it lightens things up, right? It's back to the body emotion connection, the somatic piece. You can palpably feel very different. And so, and just like when you nailed it, it's like, don't take yourself so seriously. Like life is definitely, that can complicate things. And I think to add, those were really three great pieces for people to remember, actually for themselves and for their team, right? The part about mastery, membership, and meaning. And I think the quality of it, and we can speak more, the emotional intelligence of the leader is, and there's a lot of conversations, yet sometimes it feels like there's not enough tools. So I just want to emphasize that piece of knowing thyself, you know, and having that awareness of how you are doing at any given moment that comes with certain tools and skills and practices that can support you in that, can go a long way of you then trying to understand and relate to your team, that you can meet them in a much better place. And you can outperform anybody you want to outperform as long as you show up in that vein and you model it. And yeah, all people are different and they might experience it differently. But at the end of the day, you will know that you showed up to the best of your ability with awareness and not at a default and not in a reactionary state and, you know, not as just a very triggered place. So that to me would be the biggest piece. And so thank you for your time. I'm really looking forward to our work together. And if anybody has any, so Lori, you can definitely find her on LinkedIn. She posts all kinds of actually fun articles, guys. If you don't follow her already, do, because I like read all kinds of stuff on her page that I probably would not have come across. And if you need more information, I have my own website, which is tatianasenikovic.com. But you can text me, message me on LinkedIn. You can find me here. Definitely, if you have any questions about energy, how that applies to you. If you don't think it applies to you, trust me, you are definitely in denial. I'm happy to have a chat and work with individuals, leaders, and the teams because it affects everybody. And so thank you very much, Lori, for the time. And
it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.